In virtually every country on Earth, women outlive men by 5 to 7 years. That gap is one of the most consistent findings in all of demographic research. There is one mountainous region in Sardinia where this reverses. Men there live as long as women, sometimes longer. The reason isn't genetics. It isn't the wine, though the wine is interesting. It comes down to one metric that predicts lifespan better than almost any blood marker your doctor checks. And Sardinian shepherds have been maximizing it for centuries without knowing the word for it. VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can use during sustained physical effort. It measures cardiovascular and pulmonary efficiency together. It declines with age in virtually everyone, roughly 10% per decade after 30 in sedentary adults, about 5% in active ones. A 2018 study in JAMA Network Open followed over 120,000 patients for a median of 8 years. VO2 max was the strongest predictor of all-cause mortality in the entire dataset. Stronger than blood pressure, stronger than cholesterol, stronger than smoking history. The gap between the lowest VO2 max quintile and the highest was larger than the gap between any other risk factor measured. Peter Attia has called it the single most important vital sign you can measure. The medical system mostly ignores it. Sardinian shepherds in the Barbagia region, the original blue zone, have VO2 max profiles of men 15 to 20 years younger than their chronological age. They didn't train for it. They got there by going to work. Before I get to the mechanism, the origin of the term is worth knowing. In 2000, epidemiologists Gianni Pes and Michel Poulain were studying mortality records across Sardinia. They found a cluster of municipalities in the Barbagia mountain region with an unusual density of male centenarians. As they mapped it, they drew a blue marker circle around the cluster. That circle is why we call them blue zones. Sardinia, specifically the Barbagia Highlands, was the first. Dan Buettner later expanded the research to 4 other regions and turned it into a global project. But the original data point, the reason the term exists at all, is Sardinian shepherd men living to 100. The question Pes and Poulain spent years trying to answer. Why men specifically, and why this region specifically? Traditional Sardinian shepherds in Barbagia walk between 5 and 8 miles per day through mountainous terrain. Not flat walking, uphill, across uneven ground, at a sustained, moderate pace. This matters for a specific reason. The cardiovascular adaptations that come from sustained, moderate-intensity activity across hilly terrain are different from, and in some ways superior to, structured gym exercise. You're producing prolonged elevation of heart rate at 60 to 70% of maximum, maintaining it for hours, repeatedly. This is the zone that most efficiently builds and preserves VO2 max over time. The shepherds aren't doing interval training. They're not optimizing for anything. They're moving through hard terrain because their work requires it. The cardiovascular adaptation is a byproduct of occupation. Compare this to what most working men in Western countries do. Sedentary office work, car commutes, structured gym sessions 2 or 3 times a week that are too short and too irregular to produce the same sustained adaptation. The cardiovascular gap between a Barbagia shepherd at 65 and a desk worker at 65 is measurable and significant. This is why the gender reversal exists in Sardinia and almost nowhere else. Sardinian women in the same villages live long lives, but they weren't the ones walking the mountain paths for 8 hours a day. The men's occupation produced a cardiovascular advantage that offset the typical male longevity deficit. Sardinia's longevity isn't only cardiovascular. There's a second factor worth understanding, and it's the one that tends to get all the headlines. Cannonau wine, the indigenous Sardinian red, has polyphenol concentrations 2 to 3 times higher than typical red wines from other regions. The key compounds are procyanidins, a class of polyphenols with well-documented cardiovascular protective effects. Procyanidins inhibit a process called endothelin-1 signaling, which controls arterial constriction. Lower endothelin-1 activity means more relaxed arterial walls, lower blood pressure, and reduced cardiovascular inflammation over time. A 2006 study in Nature found that regions with the highest procyanidin intake, including parts of Sardinia and southwest France, showed the strongest association with male cardiovascular longevity. Sardinian shepherds typically drink 1 to 2 small glasses of Cannonau daily with food in a social context, not binge drinking on weekends. Daily moderate consumption embedded in the meal structure. The wine is real, but it's the second mechanism, not the first. The shepherds would still have exceptional VO2 max without the wine. The wine appears to add a cardiovascular layer on top of an already robust foundation. The Sardinian diet is Mediterranean adjacent but distinct in a few ways. Staple carbohydrate, pane carasau, a flat, crisp bread with low glycemic impact. Not pasta, not refined bread. Legumes, fava beans, chickpeas, lentils, provide most of the protein. Pecorino cheese, made from sheep milk, is high in fat and protein and eaten in moderate quantities. Meat is present but not dominant, similar to Okinawa, used more as flavoring than as a main course. Caloric density, moderate to low. The diet is not particularly low-calorie the way Okinawa's was. Sardinian shepherds need adequate calories for sustained physical labor. But it's also not high in ultra-processed food or refined sugar. The food environment supports, rather than fights against, metabolic health. The more interesting nutritional story in Sardinia is what's absent. Virtually no ultra-processed food in the traditional villages, very low refined sugar historically, and a fat composition, from olive oil, pecorino, and some pork lard, that skews toward mono and saturated fats rather than industrial seed oils. The diet matters. It's just harder to isolate as a longevity driver when the VO2 max profile of these men is already exceptional and the cardiovascular protection from procyanidins is significant. The diet is load-bearing, but not uniquely so. One more mechanism, and this one is consistent across every blue zone Buettner has documented. Sardinian men in Barbagia maintain close social bonds with a tight group of lifelong friends. They gather daily, at a bar, a bench, wherever the group meets. The social connection is not occasional and scheduled. It's built into the daily structure. Multi-generational households are common. Elderly parents live with adult children and grandchildren. Social role and purpose don't disappear at retirement. Grandparents remain embedded in active family life. The research on social isolation and mortality is consistent and underreported. A 2015 meta-analysis found that social isolation increased mortality risk by approximately 26%, comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Chronic loneliness elevates cortisol and inflammatory markers at levels that produce measurable biological aging acceleration. Sardinian shepherd men avoided this entirely, not through wellness interventions, but through occupational and community structure. The same men who walked the mountains together worked, drank wine, and aged together. Here's the part of the Sardinian story that doesn't travel well. The VO2 max advantage, the procyanidin intake, the social cohesion, all of it was downstream of one thing, an occupation that required sustained daily movement through challenging terrain in a community of peers with a purpose that lasted into old age. Sardinian shepherd men didn't choose a healthy lifestyle. They were born into a farming economy that demanded specific physical inputs and produced specific biological outputs. The longevity advantage was a side effect of circumstance. This is increasingly rare. Modern economies moved most men and women away from sustained physical labor and into sedentary work, car-dependent commutes, and social structures where proximity to neighbors and lifelong community is the exception rather than the norm. You can't replicate the shepherd occupation, but you can identify what it produced biologically and back-engineer the inputs. High VO2 max from sustained moderate intensity activity. Daily moderate polyphenol intake from whole food sources, Tight social bonds maintained consistently over years. Purpose and physical role that doesn't disappear with age. Each of those is achievable. None of them comes in a bottle. 3 actionable takeaways from Sardinia. VO2 max maintenance, the most important thing. Zone 2 cardio, sustained effort at 60 to 70% of maximum heart rate for 45 to 60 minutes, 4 to 5 times per week, is the modern equivalent of the shepherd's daily walk. Hilly walking, cycling, swimming, rowing. The terrain doesn't matter. The duration and intensity zone do. Procyanidin intake. Cannonau wine is the concentrated source, but procyanidins are also found in dark chocolate, 85% or higher, blueberries, blackcurrants, and grapeseed extract. You don't need to drink wine. You need the compound, from whatever source fits your life. Social structure. One close-knit group maintained consistently, not a wide network. A few people you see regularly. This is harder to prescribe than a supplement, and more important than most supplements. Next, Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, a place where water itself may be part of the longevity equation. The mineral content of the local water supply correlates with lower cardiovascular mortality in ways that took researchers years to notice, and that most Blue Zone guides leave out entirely.